And we're live now at the Rayburn House Office Building on Capitol Hill for a hearing on the President's 2019 budget request for the Pentagon's missile defense programs. 3 generals are set to testify before a House Armed Services Subcommittee. We'll hear from the heads of U.S. Strategic Command, U.S. Northern Command, and the Missile Defense Agency. Looks like the witnesses are there waiting for members of the subcommittee to arrive. They may be a bit delayed because of a briefing that's happening as we speak on the off the House floor, I should say. Members are getting a briefing from Defense Secretary Mattis and also from the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Joe Dunford, on the missile attacks on Syria. So that briefing should be wrapping up shortly. The House itself in recess because of that. Senators also will get a briefing from those leaders later today.
Once again, we appreciate your service to our country. I'm sorry I can start.
Good afternoon. This subcommittee will come to order. We want to welcome to our hearing on the fiscal year 2019 budget request for missile defense and defeat activities. I want to thank our witnesses for their service to our country, but also for being here and the preparation that you have to put into these hearings. I know it takes a lot of time and energy, but it is very helpful to us. Our witnesses today are the Honorable John Rood, Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, General Lloyd Robinson, Commander Northern Command, North American Aerospace Defense Command, and I want to take a moment to especially recognize General Robinson. You have been a friend of this committee, and not only the commander of NORCOM and NORAD, but also across your 37 years of service to this great nation. I know I speak on behalf of this committee and the HASC as a whole, and I thank you for your dedicated and unwavering service, and we wish you well in your retirement.
I'd like to give her a round of applause.
General Lieutenant Sam Greaves, and no, he's not retiring. He's just getting warmed up. He's the Director of Missile Defense Agency. And General, congratulations on your assignment as Director of MDA. You're no stranger to this committee, and we look forward to continuing to work together with you on missile defense for a long time. And Lieutenant General, it's got Lieutenant down here. I don't think you want me to. Lieutenant General James Dickinson, Commander, Army Space and Missile Defense Command, Army Forces Strategic Command and Joint Functional Component Command for Integrated Missile Defense for the U.S. Strategic Command. Let me start by just highlighting some of what we've seen since our previous missile defense hearing in June of last year. North Korea has tested a missile with ICBM range. Iran continues to develop their own ICBMs under the guise of Space Launch Program. Putin boasted in his recent national speech about a, quote, invincible missile, close quote, targeted at the United States. And China is surging ahead with their own missile programs, most notably the hypersonic realm. Fortunately, I think this administration gets it. The budget amendment we received last year for an additional $4 billion for missile defense and the FY19 request, which includes about $12 billion across the board for missile defense, seem appropriate given the rising threat levels around the globe. As is highlighted in the National Defense Strategy, quote, we cannot expect success fighting tomorrow's conflicts with yesterday's weapons or equipment. To address the scope and pace of our competitors and adversaries' ambitions and capabilities, we must invest in modernization of key capabilities through sustained, predictable budgets, close quote. Now we are waiting on this administration to release the Missile Defense Review. Hopefully in the coming weeks we'll see it. We have developed the best missile defenses in the world, but for the most part they are technologies that were started 15 years ago. The increasing threat makes it essential that we expand and enhance our missile defenses, not only with capacity, but also through leaps in technology, right now and not 5 years from now. Increasing our GBI inventory, land-based sensors, and regional interceptor capacity is critical, but cannot come at the cost of seriously going after technologies like directed energy, space sensing, and boost phase capability. I want to thank our witnesses again. I look forward to discussion, but right now I'd like to turn to the ranking member, my friend and colleague from Tennessee, Mr. Cooper, for any opening statement he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would also like to welcome the witnesses and in particular wish General Robinson the best of luck. You've served your nation well. You should be very proud. I will hold most of my questions for the classified portion of the hearing, so I'll abbreviate my remarks now. Look forward to hearing the testimony of the witnesses.
Great. Now we'll ask each of the witnesses to summarize their opening statements. You'll be allowed 5 minutes. I would let you know each of your opening statements in their full will be taken into the record without objection, so ordered. Mr. Rood, I recognize you first for your opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Cooper, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to testify on behalf of the President's fiscal year 19 budget request in support of our efforts to improve our missile defense capabilities so that we remain ahead of the evolving threat while providing effective, integrated, and interoperable regional missile defenses in support of our global defense strategy. As the National Defense Strategy points out, the United States, allies, and partners confront a security environment that is more complex and volatile than any we've experienced in recent memory. Today, over 20 states possess offensive missiles, and potential adversaries are expanding their missile capabilities in 3 directions simultaneously. They are increasing the capabilities of their existing missile systems, adding new and unprecedented types of missile capabilities, and integrating offensive missiles more thoroughly in their coercive threats, military exercises, and war planning. As you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, in your opening statement, over the past several years, North Korea has made substantial improvements in their ICBM program. Iran is extending the range of its ballistic missile systems with the goal of achieving an operational ICBM capability, and through its Space Launch Vehicle program, could shorten the pathway to an ICBM because space launch vehicles use similar technologies. Potential adversaries are also fielding an increasingly diverse and expansive modern range of regional offensive missile systems that can threaten American forces abroad, allies, and partners. Their regional offensive missile systems include multiple types of short, medium, and intermediate range missiles intended to provide coercive, political, and military advantages in regional crises or conflicts. These missile systems appear to be a central element of Russia's frequent and explicit coercive nuclear threats to the United States, our allies, and partners. As you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, Russia is developing a new generation of advanced regional ballistic and cruise missiles that support its anti-access area denial strategy intended to defeat U.S. and allied will and capability in regional crises or conflicts. China is also engaging in substantial modernization efforts that are summarized in my statement that I will not repeat. So with this as the backdrop and the strategic context, let me turn to a discussion of the 2019 budget request for missile defense and the policies, programs, and capabilities that it supports. The Department's budget request supports the President's direction set out in the National Security Strategy to develop a layered missile defense system to protect the American homeland from North Korean and Iranian missile threats. The request also supports regional missile defenses to protect our deployed forces, allies, and partners. Our missile defense system not only protects the United States, it strengthens deterrence of war and assures our allies and partners. Today, the ground-based missile defense system provides protection for the nation. It consists of 44 ground-based interceptors deployed in Alaska and California, and land, sea, and space-based sensors, as well as a command and control system operated 24 hours a day by trained service members. We're strengthening this system, investing in technologies to ensure that we can continue to counter rogue state missile threats to our homeland. In 2017, DoD requested the reprogramming of fiscal year 2017 funding of more than $400 million to counter the North Korean missile threat. Congress approved this request, for which we are grateful. These funds support important homeland defense activities, including initiating work on the procurement of 20 additional ground-based interceptors in Alaska as early as 2023, which will bring the total to 64 fielded interceptors. The reprogramming also funded a service life extension to the Cobra Dane radar in Alaska and software upgrades to the sea-based X-band radar, both of which are essential elements to our homeland defense. In November of 2017, the President submitted an amendment to the 2018 budget request for $4 billion for missile defense, which includes construction of a new missile field at Fort Greely, Alaska, and additional procurement funding for 20 more GBIs. The FY19 budget request includes $9.9 billion for the Missile Defense Agency and $3 billion additional dollars for air and missile defense activities in the military departments. This budget funds a more capable GBI with the redesigned kill vehicle, the deployment of a missile tracking and discrimination sensors network in Alaska, Hawaii, and the Pacific region, and a new space-based kill assessment capability. These near-term investments will help us obtain substantially more performance and efficiency out of the GMD system necessary to meet the evolving threat. We're also taking steps to bolster homeland defenses against air and cruise missile threats. In 2018, we'll complete the first part of a two-part effort to provide effective surveillance against these threats to the national capital region. Doing so will enhance our ability to detect, track, and investigate suspicious aircraft as well as cruise missiles, and when necessary, cue our missile defense systems against this full spectrum of air threats. We're on track to begin the second phase of this effort in fiscal year 19, which will expand our capability to detect, identify, and take decisive action before threats can strike potential targets within the national capital region. We're also looking into technologies and concepts that can be used to provide scalable and deployable options for expanding this capability. The Department's budget request also includes deployment of regional missile defenses tailored to meet threats to U.S. forces abroad and allies and partners in Europe, the Middle East, and the Indo-Pacific region. The budget enhances our regional missile defense capability through additional Patriot missiles, as well as THAAD, SM-3 Block 1B, and SM-3 Block 2A interceptors. Our focus is on developing and fielding missile defense capabilities that are mobile and relocatable, which allows us flexibility to respond to a crisis wherever it might emerge. Because systems such as Patriot THAAD and Aegis BMD-capable ships can be surged when and where required, they make it possible to deploy layered missile defense capabilities that are responsible to regional threats as they arise. We're encouraging our allies and partners in Europe, the Middle East, and Near East and Asia, to acquire missile defense capabilities and to strengthen cooperation in order to move towards a more interoperable and integrated missile defense architecture against hostile ballistic missile and cruise missile threats. Looking forward, it's clear our potential adversaries are modernizing and expanding their capabilities. We must ensure that our missile defense investment strategy and priorities enable us to meet the most dangerous threats today, while also enabling us to counter future missile threats as they expand. Mr. Chairman, let me conclude by stating that in this increasingly complex and threatening environment, DoD must sustain the capabilities needed to deter and defend against attacks on our homeland, our forces abroad, and our allies and partners. We must make the investments needed to address the ongoing erosion of our operational advantages and remain the preeminent military power in the world. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify before you today.
Thank you, Mr. Rood. General Robinson, you're recognized.
Thank you. Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Cooper, and distinguished members of the committee, I am honored to join you today to testify alongside Undersecretary of Defense Rood, General Greaves, and General Dickinson. As has been mentioned, the strategic environment and threats facing our nation continues to evolve. Our adversaries are taking deliberate steps to extend their operational reach and are developing new capabilities to range targets in North America and Canada. At U.S. NORTHCOM and NORAD, we understand the urgency of keeping pace with these evolving threats. We also recognize that North Korea represents the most immediate threat to our homeland and therefore remains NORTHCOM's highest priority. I'm confident the ground-based mid-course defense system can defeat this threat today, and I strongly support the continued improvements to the ballistic missile defense enterprise in order to maintain our advantage. We continue to work closely with the Missile Defense Agency, the intelligence community, and others combatant commands as a part of a collaborative effort to outpace the threat. I am grateful, as has been mentioned, for the committee's approval of the FY17 above-threshold reprogramming and support the budget amendment that will increase the system's capability and capacity. Under my NORAD responsibilities, advanced cruise missiles with a low radar cross-section represent a challenge to our air defense systems. Russia continues to modernize its delivery systems, long-range bombers, and strategic submarines, capable of launching from distances not previously seen, reducing the indications and warnings we are likely to receive prior to a combat launch. To defend against advanced cruise missiles, as has been mentioned, we are making prudent investments in advanced sensors and defensive weapon systems to protect our nation's vital assets. The men and women, the warriors of U.S. NORTHCOM and NORAD stand united in a common purpose, ready to face the threats of the United States and Canada today, and we are evolving to face the threats of tomorrow. Sirs, as you've mentioned, I'm getting the privilege to retire. I will tell you that after 37 years of serving my nation, and after having these last 2 years having the sacred responsibility of defending our nation, I want you all to know my gratitude, my heartfelt appreciation for your support to NORAD and U.S. Northern Command, and to our nation's armed forces, soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marine, Coast Guardsmen, and civilians, and in my NORAD hat, Canadians. Thank you again for giving me the privilege and the opportunity to speak, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you, General Robinson. General Greaves, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Cooper, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for this opportunity to testify on the Missile Defense Agency's budget request for fiscal year 2019. I'd first like to express our appreciation to this committee for its support of the Department's above-threshold reprogramming request in September 2017 and the FY 2018 budget amendment, which provided reprogramming approval and emergency funding to enhance the nation's missile defeat and defense capabilities. I'm also very pleased to report that we are executing these funds with the utmost urgency. I would also like to thank the thousands of men and women across the government and industry who work tirelessly every day across the globe in support of our nation's ballistic missile defense system. I truly believe they remain our asymmetric advantage. Over the past year, we've been giving a clear and unambiguous message from the President that we are committed to expanding and improving a state-of-the-art missile defense system. So in my mind, the time for delays and more studies and more objections is over. As I say it, the threat has voted and continues to visibly vote through the demonstration of their capabilities. Last summer, I laid out 3 Missile Defense Agency priorities to help guide our actions, our behavior, and program planning. First, we will continue to focus on increasing system reliability to build warfighter confidence. Second, we will increase engagement capability and capacity. And third, we will address the advanced threat. I can confidently tell you today that the current BMDS system meets today's threat. However, as the threat increases in both number and lethality, we need to ensure that our systems remain reliable, remain secure from cybersecurity threats, and that the nation's ballistic missile defense capability and capacity keep pace with that threat. We currently have 44 ground-based interceptors for Homeland Defense and plan to expand the fleet to 64 by 2023. In addition, improvements in sensor coverage to include the long-range discriminating radar in clear Alaska, the addition of a Homeland Defense radar in Hawaii, if approved, and planning for a Homeland Defense radar in the Pacific, as well as advanced discrimination improvements, will enable the United States to improve protection of the homeland. The agency will also continue redesigned kill vehicle development efforts, enhance the stockpile reliability program, and expand the GBI battle space. Integrated space and terrestrial sensors for cueing, tracking, discriminating, and targeting ballistic missile threats are critical to improving missile defense architecture and its robustness. This budget will continue to fund the Space-Based Kill Assessment Demonstration Program to deliver a capability to confirm intercepts for improved defense of the homeland. We're also continuing concept definition studies for space-based missile defense tracking sensors. If pursued, space sensors will be able to detect and track both traditional as well as emerging threats as part of the BMDS architecture. Additionally, as the space layer matures, we will need an improved space test infrastructure to support verification in such areas as concept of operations and the technical performance of space assets under development. This budget will also increase the number of terminal high altitude area defense, or THAAD, interceptors to improve regional missile defenses for the protection of our forward deployed forces, allies, and partners. We will continue to install the Aegis ballistic missile defense weapon system on Aegis ships and deliver Standard Missile 3 Block 1B interceptors. We're also supporting the European phased adaptive approach, providing coverage and protection of NATO European territory, populations, and forces against the increasing ballistic missile threat from the Middle East. Our request will support continued integration of the SM-3 Block 2A missile, which is a co-development effort with Japan, into the Aegis BMD weapon system. Currently, there's an operational Aegis Ashore site located in Romania, and while we have experienced delays in the military construction portion of the Aegis Ashore effort in Poland, we remain steadfastly committed to delivery of that capability in support of EPAA Phase 3 as soon as possible. This budget request will continue the development of breakthrough technologies for integration into the BMDS, including discrimination improvements, multi-object kill vehicle technology, hypersonic defense technology, and exploring high-power lasers and interceptors that have potential against threat missiles in the boost phase of flight. Additionally, as we evaluate the elements of the missile defense system, we will actively pursue developing elements that have multi-mission and department-wide utility and leverage systems such as the F-35, which likely has the sensor, communications, and shooter capability in support of the ballistic missile defense system. Finally, we take the financial audit and our fiscal stewardship role very seriously, and MDA has robust and accountable financial management processes in place. As a note, we closed out FY17 with $151 of expiring funds out of an $8.6 billion budget that's on our books. We are now in the midst of the FY18 full financial statement audit and have received no findings to date. The bottom line is we are committed across the entire agency to achieving fully auditable books and maintaining the confidence of the Congress and the American public. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Cooper, and members of the subcommittee, I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, General Greaves. General Dickinson, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Cooper, and the other distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for your support of our soldiers, civilians, and their families. I am honored to testify before you today to emphasize the importance of air and missile defense to our nation, deployed forces, allies, and partners. Air and missile threats continue to increase, both in quantity and in offensive capability. With this in mind, thank you for the passage of the FY18 Appropriations Act and your continuing support for the nation's air and missile defense forces. Your support enables us to continue fulfilling our role in securing the nation today and developing future forces and capabilities to deter and counter tomorrow's threats. I'd like to briefly summarize the missions of the organizations I represent today. First, the United States Army Space and Missile Defense Command, Army Forces Strategic Command, SMDC-RSTRAT, serves as a force provider in support of our combatant commands. SMDC-RSTRAT, a multifaceted, multi-compo command, consists of 2 warfighting brigades, a technical center, and a future warfighting center that provides trained and ready space and missile defense forces and capabilities to the warfighter and the nation. Stretching across 11 different time zones and 23 dispersed locations, we provide low-density, high-demand capabilities for today's fight, as well as build future space and missile defense capabilities for tomorrow by researching, testing, and integrating space, missile defense, cyber, and directed energy technologies. The changing operational environment and evolving threat require us to provide the Army and the Joint Force with enhanced air and missile defense capacity and capability, and maintain readiness while managing the high operational demand of our low-density forces. Within SMDC-RSTRAT, we are collaborating closely with the Army's Air and Missile Defense cross-functional team on capabilities to increase the lethality of the Army and the Joint Force, including maneuver short-range air defense and directed energy. The cross-functional team is a key part of the Army's new modernization effort that will enable us to rapidly develop requirements and ensure future capabilities transition quickly from concept to prototyping to fielding. I also have the privilege of commanding the Joint Functional Component Command for Integrated Missile Defense, or JFCCIMD, which supports United States Strategic Command by integrating and synchronizing global missile defense operations. JFCCIMD conducts global missile defense operations support, advocates for and recommends acceptance of missile defense capabilities, and executes joint and combined global missile defense training and education for the nation. To accomplish this, we maintain close collaborative relationships with the Geographic Combatant Commands, the Missile Defense Agency, the Office of the Secretary of Defense, the Joint Staff, and our allies and partners. Despite their unique missions, a unifying principle for both SMDC-RSTRAT and JFCCIMD is our #1 priority: to protect our homeland. Both commands will remain bold and innovative, offering solutions to ensure our nation's forces are prepared to fight across multiple domains. Finally, the challenges we face cannot be met without the dedication of our greatest asset, our people. The remarkable service members, civilians, and contractors, along with their families stationed at home and globally deployed, provide support to the Army and the joint warfighter each and every day. I have the utmost confidence and respect for the warriors who volunteer to operate these highly complex systems around the world. Thank you for your continued support for the committed professionals who develop, deploy, and operate our nation's air and missile defense systems. I've addressed in detail the full range of these missions and how we are executing them, and I ask that my statement be submitted for the record, and I look forward to addressing your questions. Thank you.
Without objection, the statement is accepted into the record, and I'll recognize myself for questions. To kind of let you know what we're planning, we're going to be called for votes around 5, so it's my hope that we can get through one round of questions in open session and then trot down to the skiff for the closed portion before votes, because I don't know how long we'll be over there. But first, General Greaves, you made reference to the Romanian and the Polish Aegis Ashore sites. I'm curious as to the Romanian site, how the new AAW system that we put in the NDAA is coming along. Can you give us a progress report on that air defense system?
Mr. Chairman, the AAW system is not operational today. Within the Missile Defense Agency, my predecessor initiated, and we completed 2 demonstrations of potential capability, as in flowing data from a simulated source and then from actual tracks into the Aegis weapon system to demonstrate that that capability would work. As of right now, we are awaiting funds to complete the demonstration of an actual system, which would include a Army low-cost radar as a potential candidate, as well as the CRAM system. So as of today, it is not operational.
Great. And looking at the President's budget request for 19, it appears that Missile Defense Agency has a gap in developing critical advanced technologies such as high-powered directed energy for boost phase missile defense and space sensing. As you quoted Secretary Mattis, quote, "If we fail to adapt the speed of relevance, our focus will lose," close quote. Yet in these critical technology areas, we continue to trade studies and analyses via starting programs with goals for operational capabilities. How does a 1-year delay in Missile Defense Agency specific funding impact your ability to deliver high-powered directed energy and space sensing capabilities?
Mr. Chairman, I am concerned about that delay. However, I am very encouraged with the fact that my new boss is working with Dr. Griffin, working with Ms. Lord in her capacity, have the focus and are re-engineering and redirecting the department to prioritize, as Dr. Griffin has testified, #1 priority being hypersonic, both offense and defense, as well as directed energy. And we've had conversations. I've seen actions being taken to prioritize those 2 areas, as well as other technology areas, to deliver that capability to keep pace with the threat.
Great. and this would be to any of the witnesses, across the board there's been a consensus on the need to get to space for missile defense tracking and discrimination. Again, without the benefit of having the Missile Defense Review, can you lay out the Department's position on how space is being looked at in regards to a warfighting domain for missile defense? Are you still looking at what a space-based intercept constellation could provide? Is the ultimate goal for directed energy to be used in space? And this would be for any one of you who want to take it.
Maybe I'll start, and if General Greaves has something or the others they'd like to add, please do. Sir, you're correct that we are concerned that space has become a warfighting domain. It is a contested area. What we are observing in terms of the activities of other nations is of concern. And so you have that as a backdrop with this contested and congested space domain, and then in the missile defense area, certain capabilities as highlighted in our various statements that countries like North Korea, Iran, Russia, and China are pursuing that cause us substantial concern. So we are looking at capabilities that could be employed in space, both sensor capabilities and others. It's one of the subjects that we're continuing to evaluate potential alternatives in that regard. No final decisions made yet on those capabilities that would be pursued, but it's definitely an area of active study in the Department.
Mr. Chairman, I would add that moving our sensing layer to space to work in coordination with the ground layer is absolutely essential to keep pace with the threat that we know is coming. I'll point out one such example is the hypersonic threat. As my deputy is fond of saying, if you can't see it, you can't shoot it. So the first thing we need to do is ensure that we can maintain birth-to-death tracking of threats that are flying lower, that can maneuver, that are not as predictable as the ballistic missile threat. So it is essential that we deploy and operate a space sensing layer to begin with. The other part of it is the focus on boost phase intercept. I do not believe we have an option to not have some sort of capability for boost phase intercept, whether it be directed energy or kinetic weapons. I think there are a number of things that have to happen, of course, policy, force structure, concept of operations. Those things have to be developed by the COCOMs and other parts of the department. But the ability to have a boost phase intercept capability is, I believe, essential as we move into the future. As far as space-based interceptors, there are challenges that need to be worked through from the policy area, whether or not to base it. The technology has got to be developed, but I believe that we should be doing some work in that area to essentially lay the groundwork. If the nation decides to deploy space-based interceptors, we haven't lost the time. Time is the key. The threat is time, because as a nation, we can do anything giving enough time to develop and deploy capability. So that's my input, sir.
Great. Thank you, Chair. Now I recognize the ranking member for any questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All of the witnesses are interested in protecting all of America. But the one exception to that is Secretary Rood's testimony, where he gave special protection coming to the national capital region. How do we tell our friends in New York or Boston or Norfolk, Newport News or South Florida they get less protection than we do here?
Sir, the policy is to protect the entire United States, and that is, in fact, the capability that the ballistic missile defense system that's been deployed for the nation possesses. What I was referring to in my statement is there are some improvements that are being made for the ability to detect aircraft and cruise missiles as part of a two-phase program that will provide that enhancement. That does not mean the rest of the country will not enjoy protection as well. As you know, through our air defense system that General Robinson and others execute, we do surveil for threats to all 50 states, where we look at those threats, evaluate them, and certainly work through those defense systems.
I think it's pretty clear in your paragraph at the bottom of page 2 and top of page 3 that the national capital region comes first, at least as far as aircraft or cruise missiles threats are concerned. And your exact quote is, "We are also looking into technologies and concepts that could be used to provide scalable and deployable options for expanding this defensive capability, presumably to the rest of the country."
There are options like that for improving the capabilities that would be applied not only the rest of the country but elsewhere outside of this country that we are looking at. But in terms of the ability to defend the country against cruise missile threats, those things for aircraft, it is not, the rest of the country also will have means to do that, but there are some particular programs that have been underway for some time to provide some phased improvements in our capability for the air threats. I'm happy to provide you a fuller briefing or more information on that if you'd like, sir.
We'll talk about it in classified session. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Lamborn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. General Robinson, wish you the best in the future, and thank you for your service. But thank you all for the great work that you're doing. And the first question, actually, this is not missile defense, but it has to do with space. Yesterday, I was at the Space Symposium, and Vice President Pence, who's also chairman of the Space Council, talked about a new directive from the Council on space management, watching and tracking debris and similar things, taking that responsibility and giving it to the Department of Commerce. Mr. Rood, will that help the military focus better on its core mission to give that responsibility away?
Yes, sir, it will. As described in at Space Symposium and elsewhere, the number of objects in space continues to increase, and the number of objects not only being satellites, but some of the debris and other matters. The Defense Department has had the responsibility to catalog those objects and to engage in a discussion with the commercial operators in space with the aim of providing safe use of that space for their communications satellites or other items. As that has grown, the Commerce Department, we think, is a more appropriate player to do that, and our colleagues at the Commerce Department have stepped forward to take on that mission. The Defense Department will still maintain its responsibilities in the defense space. We will partner with the Commerce Department, but it's an area the Commerce Department will more appropriately take the lead.
Fantastic. That's great to hear. Okay, back to missile defense. General Greaves, I'd like to ask you a question. You've touched on some very important cutting-edge technologies, developing a multiple object kill vehicle, directed energy, tracking, hypersonics. Are we devoting enough resources in this budget that we're discussing to advance those technologies, or should we be doing more R&D in any of those areas?
Congressman, we are beginning the work on hypersonics, beginning the work on directed energy, and continuing the work at a lower level on the multiple object kill vehicle. I have significant hope from what I've seen already within the department that with Dr. Griffin's focus on the priorities he's laid out for the department, that the discussion will become a lot more robust, and my hope is that we will see increased resources dedicated to those areas in the next budget.
Well, this is a really important issue, and I think as we discuss the NDAA, we're going to want to make sure that the R&D resources are really there. Are any of them are you saying that it's kind of lacking right now and we need more resources?
Congressman, I'm saying the threat has demonstrated a capability within the last 18 months that was somewhat theoretical before that time. We've seen their rapid progress, and time is the enemy, and which is driving the department under Dr. Griffin's leadership to focus in those areas and apply the resources I believe that we will need to provide capabilities to stay in advance of the threat. So my hope is to see additional resources in that area in the next PB.
All right, thank you so much. And lastly, and the chairman already talked with you about this, and that is space-based sensors, whether it's infrared or electrical, optical, radar detectable, optical, so on and so forth. Are we doing enough in those areas for space-based sensors?
Let's see. Again, I'll start with the threat, and the threat I see is the hypersonic threat as the greatest threat. We are executing the planning, and I expect to see a significant increase in the amount of time and resources that we will spend in that area. It is the top priority, I believe, for me within the agency to enhance our sensor architecture and to include moving that sensor architecture to space in concert with what we have on the ground.
Okay. All right, thank you so much. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Chair, and I recognize the gentlelady from Hawaii, Ms. Hanabusa, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Robinson, thank you very much for your service. I have some questions for you about NORTHCOM and NORAD. So what is the interface between the two? They both seem to be your commands, but separate.
Yes, ma'am, that's a true statement. Under my North American Aerospace Defense Command hat, I'm responsible for defending Canada and the United States in the air domain. And so that can be whether it's Russian long-range aviation or submarine shooting missiles. So I'm responsible for that. In my NORTHCOM hat, as the commander of Northern Command, I'm responsible for defending the United States from a ballistic missile defense threat. I also work defense support to civil authorities as well as theater security cooperation with Canada, Mexico, and the Bahamas.
So, General, as you know, Hawaii had the infamous false missile alert. So I'm trying to figure out who is it that would have or should have detected if a missile was fired from North Korea, and whether it was headed for Guam, United States, continent, or Hawaii, who would have been the agency or the entity that should be the one frontline detecting it?
So we look at that STRATCOM does the initial sensing. And then we work our way through on as the missile, and I can be much more clearer in the closed session.
Okay.
But as we work our way through the missile launch and as it goes through flight, then there's different roles and responsibilities that we have. And at the end of the day, when it comes time to defend the United States against a ballistic missile, it's me as the commander of NORTHCOM.
So just so that I'm clear, when we're talking about Hawaii or Guam, is it different, or is that considered to be, as it reaches a certain, it seems like trajectory, it would become your responsibility?
Ma'am, I would really rather talk about that in a closed session.
Okay.
So I can give you the detail you're looking for.
And as you can imagine, that's a question that's plaguing us in Hawaii right now. We're trying to figure out who is the one who should know. The one thing that the congressional delegation is uniformed on in Hawaii, our 4 members, is that we believe that we should split apart the, quote, the emergency alert system between that which is potentially military ballistic missile in particular, and that which would be, like we just had major flooding and hurricanes and tsunamis. That should be something that the state should handle. But we're not sure the state should be delving in this area of missiles and missile alerts. In the testimony, let me get to, I believe, the General Dickinson. When we talk about the whole spectrum of missile defense and how we break it up in terms of from I guess when it's shot up and it goes up in the trajectory and then it goes straight and it starts to come down. Now, do you have any specific role in that scenario, or is that General Graves?
So I'll start off with the operational perspective, and I'll turn it over to General Graves for the technical piece to that. But what you're describing is our ability to look at the total trajectory of the ballistic missile flight and able to influence or have capabilities in each stage of that flight, whether it's pre-launch, whether it's during the mid-course, terminal, or even the boost phase. Our ability to do operational planning and then have capabilities that are able to influence each one of those steps in the flight of that missile is very important. So when you look at operational design around the world in each of the different COCOMs for our regional missile defenses as well as our national defenses, we looked at that very carefully to see how we do that, and then the capabilities that come along with that are critical to our ability to influence each one of those sections of flight.
General, I don't mean to be insulting in any way, But if it takes as long to detect it as you just gave the explanation, there are a lot of people who are going to be very antsy. General, do you have anything to add?
Just one clarification, ma'am, is that my role is the acquirer. Our folks, they essentially work with industry to deliver the capability. The operational use of those systems rests with the combatant commanders.
Thank you very much. With that, I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Hunter, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here and for your service. I guess, General Dickinson, let's talk about, if we could, the way that the pendulum swings from high-tech to low-tech based on what we're doing at whatever point in time that we exist right now, which is looking at North Korea, looking at Russia and China, talking a lot about space, very complex, giant systems, when 10 years ago the focus was the CRAM, our counter-battery radars acquiring rockets and other just mortars, and hate and disconnect and content that guys were shooting at our forward operating bases in Iraq and Afghanistan, right? So that's switched now. So now we're focusing more on space stuff. I guess my general question is, to begin, do you think the pendulum is staying where it needs to be, to where we get back in that fight again where we're getting shot at all the time and we realize we kind of lost that sharpness that we had in that fight and gave it up to the more high-tech big fight, and realizing that there's only a few countries that where it takes satellites and interceptors and other things to stop their ICBMs. There's lots of countries that can do a lot of bad things to forward operating bases in Africa, the Middle East, and the Philippines, to other places. I guess that's the pendulum question. Where are we?
So I think with regards to your question, so we've identified that, your mention of the CRAM system. The Army as a whole has identified that as an area that we're continuing development in terms of building back a short-range air defense capability that we'll bring back into the Army formations here in the next several years. We're currently looking at what we call maneuver SHORAD capabilities, whether that's a gun missile mix or potentially in the future to a directed energy. My particular command, we are looking into directed energy and have had some good success in demonstrating a 5 kW laser mounted on a Stryker combat vehicle. And we've had very good success over the last year and a half or so with four different tests where we actually had soldiers on the Stryker combat vehicle engaging small UAS quadcopter type targets very successfully. So as we mature that technology beyond 5 kW onto 50 kW with the ultimate objective for the Army at 100 kW, we are looking at that. That will be integrated into what we call a IFPIC, which is the follow-on to the CRAM, that will have an ability to use directed energy as well as potentially a gun missile mix. We're also looking to see whether or not we can employ electronic warfare in some of those capabilities as well. So overall, the Army has identified the fact that we need to bring back that capability into the maneuver forces for the Army. And so to your question, I would say the pendulum is probably about right. We're looking at what we need to do to address what you described, the counter-UAS, counter-cruise missile capability, and we're looking to the near-peer adversaries that have the more sophisticated missile technology.
Look at what the Ukrainians went through with the Russians bombarding with artillery fire. Yes, and I'd like the members of this committee to know we're the ones, this committee, before I was in Congress, put the CRAM in Iraq in the first place. It was a Navy, it shoots spent uranium and missiles coming in. The military didn't want to do it. This committee loaded one up in California, sent it out there, and they could then shoot rockets and mortars coming in with the spent uranium, and it saved a lot of lives. But it was one of the things that this committee did that was outside of the box that the military didn't want to do. Right, that's, I guess lastly, are you looking at what the Ukrainians have done with our counter-battery radars that we gave them with restrictions? We couldn't give them any offensive weaponry for the last eight years, but we gave them counter-battery radars, and they've really rigged those up to do some amazing things. Have you guys looked at that?
We continue to look at that and other operational scenarios we've had in the theater with our own weapon system as we build to the future with that capability.
And I guess tying in with that, you have the new Integrated Air and Missile Defense Battle Command System, the IBCS, right? Can you just talk about that briefly?
So that's the future system we're bringing.
In terms of the budgeting and its milestones on being on track in time.
So the program overall is on track to deliver in 2022. We'll do a limited user test in 2020. That system will, that capability brings online the fact that we'll be able to bring in multiple sensors, multiple shooters onto an integrated fire control network. So that will greatly enhance our capability to essentially have the best shooter and the best sensor coupled together to prosecute the targets.
And that would plug into whatever the distributed common ground system is in the future, I would guess?
We're looking at that, yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Norcross, 5 minutes. Or not. All right. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from the great state of Alabama, Mr. Byrne, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think, General Greaves, this is directed to you, but if I'm wrong, tell me. I want to talk about hypersonic. You the right person for that?
One of several.
Well, if somebody else needs to answer this, jump in. I know that y'all have spent a little over a year now on your analysis of alternatives, and I've been reading that recently China has made some pretty shocking advances in the realm of hypersonic weapons. Aside from the flight testing they've done, there are reports that they're heavily investing in their ground testing infrastructure and have planned to have a wind tunnel operational by 2020 that can simulate hypersonic speeds, which will allow them to better test their weapons. There are no indications that they're slowing down the development of their capabilities. And earlier this year, Admiral Harris with PACOM testified before this committee that Chinese hypersonic weapons are one of the biggest threats in his region. So can you tell us, as you're coming to the close of the analysis of alternatives, what you've learned so far and how far the agency is in moving forward?
Yes, sir. You are correct. We are coming to closure on the AOA, the analysis of alternatives. I should be able to get a quick look within the next 30 days, and before the end of the year, that should be completed. What we are determining is that the architecture that we need to defend against that hypersonic threat will be air, ground, and space-based. The most important one initially is to deploy that sensing layer I referenced before. But also we need to look at the systems engineering portion of that to roll out and develop the architecture that's required, as well as a potential new interceptor that we may need to mitigate that threat. So it's a complete architectural look at what will be needed. And the threat, the enemy, is time again. So we look to Dr. Griffin and Ms. Lord's leadership within the department to strongly advocate for what will roll out of the AOA and to ensure that activity is resourced and funded in next year's budget, and we can continue on to deploy those capabilities to meet the threat. And I'll turn it over to either Secretary Root or General Robinson to see if they had anything to add.
Sure.
I think General Greaves largely covered it, except to say I concur with you fully about the growth of the threat. I think we're very concerned about the rate of progression that we've seen, not only in China but elsewhere, like Russia. And so it's an area that we're looking very seriously at in the department, and the analysis of alternatives being led by General Greaves and Dr. Griffin.
Let me pose a hypothetical to you, a very disturbing hypothetical. There's a breakdown in Congress, and we decide to go back to the funding levels that are established in the Budget Control Act for the out years. What does that do to what you're responsible for, Mr. Rood?
Well, certainly the Congress in its recent actions has shown great confidence in the Defense Department leadership to come forward with the kind of programs and capabilities to defend the nation.
But it was a 2-year deal, and it could break down.
You're correct, sir.
What happens to what you're responsible for if there's a breakdown and we go back to those spending levels under the Budget Control Act?
It would obviously pose a substantial concern because the levels envisioned in the Budget Control Act are significantly below that which we are operating now. As the National Defense Strategy makes clear, we've entered a period of competition amongst the great powers, with China and Russia being our principal concerns, but certainly states like North Korea, Iran, and the fight that we are in with violent extremism posing a substantial threat. So certainly a substantially smaller defense budget as envisioned under those BCA caps would be a significant concern for us.
Would it endanger your ability to defend America against a missile attack?
Well, we would obviously continue to mount an effective defense with the capabilities we have, but certainly a smaller top-line budget and how that got translated down to missile defense would impose some significant constraints.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. Chair, and I recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Davis, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all very much for being here. This morning, and you might have seen or heard, we had a session on promoting DoD's culture of innovation. And the question really is whether or not we're able to keep pace with the scope and, of innovation in the defense technology sector, given a host of issues, including culture, but some of the restrictions that we have in terms of our own laws, in terms of our own need to create multiple layers of authority, and a little different from DARPA, as you well know. How do you see that? You know, could you comment on that? Because I think a lot of us know and understand some of the difficulties we have, that it takes a long time to bring many of those technologies to bear, and by the time we're ready for them, it's late. What do you see? What holds you up in being able to get what you need to the warfighter in a timely fashion?
Ma'am, I'll start with what Dr. Griffin said this morning. The three impediments that he discussed this morning. The first being excessive processes, bureaucracy. The second being risk aversion nature, and the third being a fear to fail. Those are things which are the biggest impediments. I totally concur with him that leads to, if not indecision, the length of time it takes to make a decision. I think speed of decision making within the department is what we need. And with those three impediments that Dr. Griffin laid out and his intent to reduce or attempt to eliminate those, I think will go a long way in ensuring that we can make the decisions in a time-relevant manner, as the Secretary of Defense talks about, to deliver the capability we need. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
The only thing I'd add, Congresswoman, is that for Secretary Mattis, improving the department's capabilities to both be good stewards of the taxpayers' dollars, as well as to improve the speed at which we can field capabilities to the warfighters, is one of his three top lines of effort. He works that through his leadership team. Deputy Secretary of Defense in particular, very focused in this area. And I think the legislation that Congress passed, creating the separation with an Undersecretary for Research Engineering and an Undersecretary for Acquisition and Sustainment, certainly something we fully embrace and are starting to move forward with. So the problem and the challenge certainly is very well understood by the senior leadership of the department. We've now got to make the changes necessary to support the kind of innovation you just discussed.
Mm-hmm. And I think the Congress is ready and willing to try and work through a number of those requirements so they don't basically take us down a complicated path that perhaps we're going to be able to avoid in the future. Recognizing, of course, we still have many requirements that are going to be out there. Thank you. I appreciate that. I think the other issue that we've all worked with and talked about is whether or not it's possible through the use of multiple satellites to, in fact, have less expensive technology, more of it, that may, in fact, help us to mitigate some of the high costs and even the issues around missile defense. Is that something that you feel that we can be exploring further and we should be exploring further?
Ma'am, I totally agree. We are exploring it today. We've taken action in certain areas today and within the recent past, and it's something we must do in the future, whether or not it's disaggregating missions or payloads from what I call our Battlestar Galacticas, or hosting payloads, or using commercial capability. Those are all things that I know that the department has been looking at, is looking at, and will be looking at into the future.
Thank you. And just quickly, the agency's top line of $11.5 billion for this fiscal year is going to be cut down in the administration's budget to 9.9. Is that a concern to you, that you'll be able to, mitigate again the impacts of what's being proposed as a funding reduction?
Ma'am, I think that the answer is yes. It concerns me, but I do believe that we've got the management structure in place, the attention in place. The threat has voted. I mean, the fact that North Korea has done what it's done is visible to the entire nation, the entire world. So it's reality we're dealing with, and those discussions will be very robust within the department to ensure that we deploy a missile defense system that is capable of defending the nation.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentlelady. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Hayes, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Greaves, let me begin with you with this. For directed energy boost phase missile defense application, can you explain the similarities and differences between what MDA requires versus the services?
Yes, sir. Short answer is power level. As you heard General Dickinson discuss his requirements to go from 5 kilowatts to 50 to 100. The missile defense requirements begin at 500 kilowatts to a megawatt. And we can discuss more of that in the closed session, but power level as well as delivery capability. For the boost phase intercept mission, if you may recall, the airborne laser program, chemical laser, which essentially operated within the atmosphere. We're looking at a deployment capability that's much higher, 60,000 feet plus, and all of the beam steering, beam quality requirements that go along with that. So bottom line is power level.
General Dickinson, anything you would like to add to that?
I'd agree with what General Greaves said. What we're developing right now is intended for more of a close fight, if you will, in support of the maneuver forces, whether Army, Marine, and the power levels we're talking about are appropriate for countering UASs and potentially cruise missiles, in the short term.
Okay. General Greaves, are there areas that are not being addressed by the Department's High Energy Laser Advanced Development Program that are specific to what MDA had intended to use for those funds in FY19 that would somehow delay the missile defense capability?
No, sir. What I would say is that the discussion is a department concern, a department level discussion right now. So we're looking at the requirements that on the lower end, as General Dickinson mentioned, as well as mine. We are working with Dr. Griffin's staff and Dr. Griffin in particular to ensure that the funds that were allocated for directed energy and the funds that we requested make it down to our level.
Okay, the last question I have for you, in your written statement, I wanted to shift gears a little bit here, but in your written statement, you discussed the need to develop technology and capabilities that will take out ICBMs in their boost phase of flight. Can you explain how in the FY19 budget that's being requested, how that would help those technologies?
Yes, sir. Basically, it's the amount we've got allocated to do what we call laser scaling. We've been able to demonstrate 30 kilowatts in the lab. We need to continue the work to upgrade that power level demonstration capability to 100 kilowatts in a stepwise fashion to get to the 500 1 megawatt level. So the technology work is absolutely essential so that we can demonstrate the capability on the ground and in the air, if that's part of the plan, before we leap off into a full system that has promises which we haven't delivered the high technology readiness level capabilities that we need to develop and deploy the system.
Okay, and so you feel comfortable that the PB19 budget request would be sufficient?
I will be advocating for additional funding, to be quite honest with you.
That's what I wanted to know.
There were hard decisions that had to be made within the department, and the PB represents the product of those decisions.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Brooks, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Greaves, it has been brought to my attention that requirements for a THAAD follow-on development program have been eliminated, even though other missile defense systems have had ongoing follow-on development after their initial fielding.
Given the pace of threat evolution globally, and given that THAAD is a successful and in-demand system, can you share your plans, if any, for an ongoing THAAD follow-on that would build upon current capabilities?
Congressman, to be quite honest, we, across all of our systems, look at what the next generation can produce and can field. THAAD currently meets the requirements that have been delivered to us, and I will not say that it's not being done. I'd say that the system that we've delivered meets requirements, and we're looking to see what capability will enhance its capability for the future.
As a follow-up, currently THAAD was operationalized in Hawaii in 2009 to provide additional homeland missile defense against longer-range threats from North Korea. Perhaps THAAD could provide another layer of coverage against ICBMs for homeland defense. What, if any, are your plans to test THAAD against ICBM targets?
Congressman, I request that we cover that in the closed session. I have a quick answer for you, but I would not want to say too much in the open session.
Right. If you would, I'm not sure if I'll be here during the closed session, but if you will answer that question for the record, I would appreciate it. We're about to have votes called in 5 or 10 minutes is what I've been notified, and I do have other meetings and that are conflicting.
Short answer, sir, we have studied it and we got the answer.
All right, thank you. General Greaves and General Dickinson, are you concerned that current THAAD battery and interceptor availability will be challenged given current and future operational requirements?
Why don't you take it?
Yeah, as of today, we've got 6 going to 7 operational THAAD batteries. And Congressman, I know you're well aware we have one that's in Guam and one recently deployed to Korea. So, you know, as you look at the capacity that we have, we've got 5 ready, or soon to be 5, 4 right now, 5 here this fall that'll be fully operational. I think the THAAD weapon system and the way it's developed and designed right now gives us some flexibility and capacity, operational flexibility, in the sense that we can move, you know, additional launchers from one battery to the other to increase capacity if needed. But at this particular time, I think the 7 batteries, which I believe are the program of record by MDA, is satisfactory.
Do you have a plan to provide additional THAAD batteries to the Army or to add launchers to the existing batteries to increase defensive capabilities?
Congressman, General Dickinson mentioned the program of record. So as of today, the answer is no. Program of record is 7. However, there is discussion within the department on what the THAAD battery requirement is. And if that changes, we will request resources to develop and deploy that capability.
And then finally, General Greaves, can you talk a little bit about the status of the Joint Emergent Operational Need for U.S. Forces Korea, what work has begun and what work needs to be done? I'm aware of your unfunded requirement of $284 million for the JEON, Joint Emergent Operational Need, and I am concerned that key integration work for THAAD and the PAC-3 MSE missile and for launch-to-own remote capability has not been funded.
Yes, Congressman, that is one of the top priorities for General Brooks in Korea, who discussed that requirement with me directly. We have laid out a plan which, if resourced properly, provides that capability to improve the interoperability between those 2 systems. We will continue to advocate for the funding required to complete that project, and pending department decision, we'll see where we go next.
All right, Mr. Chairman, that concludes my questions. Gentleman and lady, thank you for your service, and I yield the remainder of my time back.
Thank the gentleman. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Kaufman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To all the witnesses, how is the rapid advance of North Korean missile technology? Obviously, they still have to weaponize that launch system. But how has that affected your decisions, the U.S. missile defense posture?
Well, I'll start and invite my colleagues to add to that, sir. Certainly the rapid pace that the North Koreans are improving their capabilities and the demonstrable way they've gone about that, with some 24 ballistic missile tests in recent years accompanied with nuclear testing, has really punctuated the concern that we've had for quite some time about North Korea, punctuated it with an exclamation point. And so that has gotten our attention. We have, as mentioned in our statements, last year requested supplemental funding which the Congress was supportive of, and thank you for that, to increase the pace at which we're doing that. But the size, scale, and sophistication of the threat is growing, and the size, scale, and sophistication of our defense is proposed to grow in the President's budget request. And we are presently examining capabilities to take that to a substantially higher level, not just for the United States. As discussed, we have deployed THAAD to South Korea. We are in conversations with our Japanese allies and other partners about how we can improve our collective capabilities to be able to respond to that threat, sir.
Sir, the only thing I would add to that is, as the commander of NORTHCOM, is, we watched very quickly with the rapidity with which he did testing and the speed with which he made capability. So with the ATR that was given to us last year to be able to add capacity while we're still working on the redesigned kill vehicle, will also add to the capability, and still working on discrimination radars. So all of this is good news to help us, but we watch them very closely.
And Congressman, I support entirely what Secretary Rood and General Robinson just articulated. It has caused us and helped us to focus our efforts on and make the articulation of the threat a whole lot easier, because it's been demonstrated and the timeline has been compressed due to the demonstrated capability that we've seen.
And in my role as a force provider for General Robinson, for the soldiers that actually operate the GM system, I would tell you I'm absolutely confident in their abilities to operate that system 24 hours a day on behalf of the nation, and completely confident given the capabilities that we have seen demonstrated in the weapon system that we have, and in complete agreement with where we're going on the path to improve the reliability and performance of the system.
I wonder if all witnesses again, I mean, across the board, there's been a consensus on the need to get to space for missile defense tracking and discrimination. Again, without the benefit of having the MDR, can you lay out the Department's position on how space is being looked at in regards to a warfighting domain for missile defense? Are you still looking at what a space-based intercept constellation could provide? Is the ultimate goal for directed energy to be used in space?
Well, I'll just start briefly and again reiterate that we're concerned about the progression of space capabilities and the contested nature of space as a domain, just as a general matter. In the area of missile defense, of course, the offensive missiles that could be fired against the United States will transit space and re-enter. We have had in our architecture for some time space-based capabilities to track and detect the launch of those missiles, and there have been efforts over the years to have a space-based test bed and other activities to evaluate competing capabilities. Certainly the Missile Defense Agency and General Greaves can articulate that further, have put forward concepts for space-based tracking capabilities, which the Department has funded for demonstration this year. And we are looking at additional capabilities in that regard, both in the space-based tracking area and evaluating the capabilities that could be potentially fielded in space for the kill mechanism, whether that be through directed energy or other means. Those are things we're just simply evaluating at this stage, but General Greaves may want to articulate more.
Congressman, it begins with the threat. Today's ballistic missile threat is fairly predictable. You throw the baseball from where I am in that direction, it'll go in that direction. The concern, again, is what we've seen Russia, China, and other nations do in the area of hypersonics, where it's lower flying, maneuverable, and the need as they deploy more complex countermeasures, things aimed at defeating our missile defense capabilities. The absolute essential need to track and maintain custody of that threat from beginning to end, and that draws you up into space. We don't have enough radars to populate the globe to maintain that same level of custody. So from a space sensing layer, absolutely essential. First thing we need to do, increase that capability. And then as the nation decides what the next step is with deploying an interceptor, if it's space-based, whether or not to do it, how to use directed energy, spending resources on the technology and initial development work to essentially determine if that capability is real or not. So it's really critical that we pursue the space-based capability.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Looks like if we walk briskly down to the skiff, we will be able to get the classified session done before votes. So we will reconvene. We will stand in recess for 5 minutes while we move to the skiff.
Hi, Mr. Chairman. How do you do? I'm Andrew Clevenger with CQ.
Hey, nice to meet you.
Did you overlap at all with Aaron Mehta?
No, he's half in town, but we still read his work. Everybody still talks about him there.
Yeah, he's a good friend of mine.
Nice.
Yeah. How long have you been with CPI?
Almost 3 years, 2 years.
Oh, wow. Okay. Did you know David Heath at all?
Oh, yeah, I knew David well, and in fact, my previous boss, before I came here, I was in Santa Fe, New Mexico, briefly, working for Ray Rivera, and Ray and his